So that makes 9 months. You must have witnessed the birth of the Baptist.
The fun thing is people come on and they can hear us right now. As they're coming on, they can actually hear us. We're already engaged in the text and talking about it.
I got nothing to hide.
Yeah. So good evening, everybody, as we're coming on here. Little transitions.
And then Elizabeth, what told you? You say Mary. Elizabeth was probably well into her 40s.
Good evening. I guess I'll go ahead and say hi to the people who are here since we're already talking about stuff. I'm going to turn down our volume here. Good evening, everybody. Good to have you here. Welcome to A Bright Spot in the Week. And it's bright and it's a little bit warm, but we didn't have a lot of glaring sun today. I get Clark shaking his head. Nah. Yeah, it's not bad compared to what it had been. But what I sometimes have to explain to folks when they come in the building is that we've already been here for a while, and we've got 3 fans running and an air conditioner running, and we're pulling air out of the air conditioner in Maureen's office and the air conditioner in my office in order to take the stuffiness out of the air, because when we got here, it was like stepping into an oven. So, you know, what it feels like outside and what it actually is like inside the building can be very different, you know. And you know, you can step down the sanctuary and it's not horribly hot, but it's really, really stuffy. Anyways, I'm sure you're sitting in your air conditioning at home. So anyways, it was a beautiful day. Every day is a gift. Of course it is. We didn't have a bright sunshiny day. It's cloudy. It looks like we're going to be getting some rain coming in, which we could use. And cold drink night. That's right. Just glad to have you along for the ride here tonight. So you'll notice we're in a little bit different space. And that's because we're in the parish hall. And one of the things we're working on in church, we've discussed it since last Sunday, is can we make a more comfortable spot for us as we go into the hotter days of summer, inevitably. And so the parish hall is an area that we can close off, and we're working on getting some extra air conditioners in here, and should be able to make a pretty comfortable space. So if you're thinking about worshiping with us and think it's too hot to come to church, we fully intend to have this space nice and cool for you come Sunday. So come join us at 10 o'clock. And of course, we're here for our Wednesday evening Bright Spot in the Week. And we got the air conditioner running right now. And so, yeah, you know, we're here if you want to come and be physically present. And I know that some of you could hear us talking as we were coming in. That's because whenever we get together, we start to dive into the subject matter at hand. And it just, you got to kind of jump in with us, right? So let's have a word of prayer, and then we'll get started with this evening's program. Let's pray. Blessed and almighty God, we thank you for the time just to sit down here together in a nice, comfortable spot and spend a little time in your holy word. We ask that you encourage our curiosity. That's what we ask for. Guide us in your light. In Christ's name, amen. And also for you folks at home, Miss Kay, she is on her computer, which means if you're on the Facebook platform during the live broadcast, you can send in your prayer requests, because we always have prayer near the end of the program. And also, if you have a question about the text, you know, or comment. We got lots of comments that happen here. So, well, we invite it. We appreciate it. That's what we do, right? It's quite all right. So we're going to go ahead and have a little something here to laugh about tonight. Since we are going to be talking about John the Baptist, it'd be like a paleo diet, wouldn't it? Yeah, I think so. Something like that. Okay. So we're going to move on down to our text here, and we are in the Gospel of Mark tonight, chapter 6, verses 14 to 29. It's a little bit on the long side. That's because it's a narrative, and when you get a story that runs through, sometimes it just, you know, it's a little bit longer. So here we go. And like I advertised on Facebook, if you saw the post I put up, tonight's going to be politics and religion and corruption. I think we got all of it covered tonight, so we're going to dive right into that.
Sounds like the news.
I was like, yeah. Well, it's just like the news. It's like watching the news. It seems like it was, you know, current. I got to tell you, when I got my first, well, not my first job, I worked as a teenager, but when I got my first adult job, yeah, I remember that the man who hired me said, because I was going to go out and I was in the agribusiness, and I was going to be out meeting with fruit growers and things and contracting for apples and tomatoes. And he says, whatever you do, don't talk religion or politics, right? What do you think everybody wanted to talk about? Of course, religion and politics. And I was going to work among mostly the Amish. So, there you go. I don't think they don't know about politics, because they sure do. Okay, so Mark 6:14-29. Here we go. Religion and politics and some other stuff thrown in here. King Herod heard of it, for Jesus' name had become known. Some were saying John the Baptizer has been raised from the dead, and for this reason these powers are at work in him. But others says it is Elijah, and others said it is a prophet like one of the prophets of old. But when Herod heard of it, he said, John, whom I beheaded, has been raised. That's a pretty curious reading, isn't it? We'll dig back in here. For Herod himself had sent men who arrested John, bound him, and put him in prison on account of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because Herod had married her. Okay, there we're getting to the corruption. Okay, for John had been telling Herod, it is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife.
Did his brother die?
Well, I don't know the answer to that.
No, I think he's still alive.
He's still alive today. No, but
I think he was still alive
when this story's going on. I got to think about that a little bit. I'm not sure. So we're going to look at Herod's descendants here in a few moments. So
doesn't the law say if your husband dies, then you can marry? So he must have been still alive.
You could, okay, that would make it unlawful. And we're already getting into the study before we finish reading, but nonetheless, the law which he's talking about here is not the Roman law. Okay, it's not against the Roman law like Herod would care that much. He means the Jewish law code. We're going to go back and talk to them why that mattered in this circumstance, okay? So anyways, and Herodias had a grudge against him and wanted to kill him, but she could not. For Herod feared John, knowing that he was a righteous and holy man, and he protected him. When he heard him, he was greatly perplexed, and yet he liked to listen to him. Yeah. He's just a little bit twisted. Okay, but an opportunity came when Herod on his birthday gave a banquet for his courtiers and officers and for the leaders of Galilee. When his daughter Herodias came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his guests, and the king and said to the girl, ask me for whatever you wish, and I will give it. And solemnly swore to her, whatever you ask me, I will give you, even half of my kingdom. So she went out and said to her mother, what should I ask for? She replied, the head of John the Baptizer. Immediately she rushed back to the king and requested, I want you to give me at once the head of John the Baptist on a platter. Let's just talk about grammar for a second, because if somebody requests something, they usually don't automatically demand it, but that's what she did. She had some chutzpah. Okay, the king was deeply grieved, yet out of regard for his oaths and for the guests, he did not want to refuse her. Immediately the king sent a soldier of the guard with orders to bring John's head. He went and beheaded him in prison. And get on the right page here for these guys. Brought his head on a platter and gave it to the girl. Then the girl gave it to her mother. When the disciples heard about it, they came and took his body and laid it in a tomb. Woo! Okay, there we go. Let's see what this next slide's about. Okay, I know what this is. So this is a painting by Bernardino Luini from 1527. And you can see what's going on here is heads being dropped into a dish. So the executioner's over there on the right, and I get a kick out of the young lady in here, because this is supposed to be, according to the text tonight, for the moment, it's Herodias, the daughter of Herodias, whose name is Herodias. Okay. And she's glancing away as if, I don't want to look at it. But look at the smirk on her face. She's like completely enjoying this, isn't she? Yeah. Yeah. So, shame on her. Okay, let's take a look at so, if we were trying to get just an idea of what maybe John the Baptist could have possibly looked like. This is a dashing young man. This photograph was taken a little over 100 years ago, and this is a Bedouin nomad. And he's quite a handsome fella. But I wanted you to see it because he's wearing a camel hair cloak, which is what John the Baptist is described to have worn. And also consider the color of his skin. And this would be very typical of someone locally there. So this could almost be Jesus, I think the thing that would have made it obvious it's not that it was Jesus would be that he would likely have on the rabbinical prayer shawl, which is black and white stripes. He might have been wearing, we talked about this before, the little box on his forehead and on his arm, a frontlet and an armlet with, with a quote from Deuteronomy, right? Anybody remember what the quote from Deuteronomy is?
Love your God.
Yay, okay, there it is. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. Yeah, that's a quote from Deuteronomy, and that's what the rabbis who were ultra.
Also, all the answers Jesus gave during his 40 days, was the quote he gave to the devil.
Mm-hmm.
They came from Deuteronomy.
Oh, I believe that too, but I think that on the frontlet, I know what was traditional was that quote about love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. So, John the Baptist could have looked like this guy right here, quite possibly. And I wanted to just show you, let me see here. Oh, you know what? I got something here for our folks at home that we don't have here. So just hang in there with me here, the folks that are with us at the table. I got a quotation here from Matthew 11, and I want to read this because this is Jesus talking about John, describing John. So because John is such an important figure, not only in the lesson for tonight, but in the entire story of Jesus in a lot of ways. We'll delve into that some, but so it's very important to see how John looked at Jesus. So here it is. Now, we were talking earlier before we started tonight, the relationship between Mary and John's mother, Elizabeth. Apparently they were first cousins. That would make Jesus and John the Baptist second cousins. So they're relatives, all right? So here's from Matthew 11, 7-11. As they went away, Jesus began to speak to the crowds about John. What did you go out into the wilderness to look at? A reed shaken by the wind? What then did you go out to see? Someone dressed in soft robes? Look, those who wear soft robes are in royal palaces. What then did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, I tell you, and more than a prophet. This is the one about whom it is written. Now, here's a biblical quote. See, I'm sending my messenger ahead of you who will prepare your way before you. Truly, I tell you, among those born of women, no one has arisen greater than John the Baptist. Now, I don't know of anybody who wasn't born of a woman, but that was an interesting little turn of phrase there, okay? But none was greater than John the Baptist. I wanted you guys to at least hear that. Yeah, and so I'm going to put this map up now because this is where we are with the folks here at the table. You're looking at it, you're probably pretty familiar with it now. And this particular map, if you take a look right there, there's a little hard to read, but where John was in prison at King Herod's palace, and that is actually on the eastern side of the Dead Sea. So we so often focus on everything that's to the west of the River Jordan because that's where Jesus' ministry primarily was. And of course, modern day Israel is over there. We see Judea, Samaria, up and through that area, up into Galilee. That's modern day Israel. Idumea, it was a southern region. Actually, the modern day Israel encompasses that also. And just below the screen is Egypt. So right there to the lower left-hand corner would be the Gaza Strip that's in the news today. But over there on the other side of the Dead Sea was where Herod's palace was. So that gives you an idea of where John was in prison and where he was beheaded. So I want to show you this because we were just talking a moment ago about how these folks are connected, right? And let me get you on the right page here, folks at home. There we go. And it's a little confusing because Herod is a name they bandied around over a couple generations. So it's a little bit like, kind of like Caesar. You remember Caesar, it's just like Pharaoh. It's another one of those, it's a title as much as anything. So Herod the Great, and you can see that he died before the lesson for today. So the Herod that we're talking about today is his son. Okay, so Herod the Great is responsible for rebuilding the temple in Jerusalem. So in the days of Jesus, the great temple in Jerusalem was called Herod's temple. Okay.
He was a big builder. He built a lot of stuff.
Oh yeah, he had lots of slaves. Lots of time, lots of money, lots of slaves.
A lot of sicknesses.
Yeah.
Right going wrong with him.
Well, now's a good time to talk about him a little bit because, why would John confront Herod over a Hebrew law about marriage? Why would that apply to Herod?
Well, question.
Huh?
It's a good question.
Yeah, okay. He was Jewish.
Oh, yeah, we knew.
Yeah, he was Jewish, right.
But he was like a waffling Jew.
Well, he had sold out to Rome.
Yeah.
Okay? So he was a governor, he was a Roman governor, and you get a governorship by appointment from Caesar. So whatever the history was, and I've long forgotten what all the history was for this particular individual, but anyways, he was in the good graces of Rome. And what Rome did was, well, here's an example. So when you have an occupying force that goes into another country, I think most recently we occupied Afghanistan. So as much military power as you take there and expertise and everything, you still need to connect with local individuals who have influence over various tribes or regions and things like that, right? So but immediately think of Hamid Karzai, who was president of Afghanistan. And that got me in trouble at the airports because my last name is Hamid. So when we were traveling at that time, I got frisked every single time we went through. Now they frisk K. Well, they're stopping. I don't know what it is with K. But anyways, the Hamid Karzai, spelled differently than my last name, but nonetheless. And so you would connect with local powers and then you would try to control them. Okay, so this is what Rome did. And, because this land is a long way from Rome, and so if you get somebody who's in your pocket, which Herod was, he's the governor, he's going to do what Caesar wants, but he is actually Jewish. And in the mind of Caesar and the others of Rome, the leadership of Rome, they thought that, well, this is great because then he can work with the local Jewish people well enough, or he knows them well enough to take advantage of them or whatever. But he had more local knowledge than what anybody from Rome would have. So he was the governor. And so these are the children of Herod that you're looking at. And so our Herod in the lesson today is one of these children. It's the second in the list, Herod Antipas. Okay? And so Herod Antipas, I'm looking at Philip here right now too, because Philip, oh gee whiz. I'm digging my brain here a little bit. So up north of the Sea of Galilee, when Jesus, okay, I know where it is. When Jesus said, on this rock I will build my church, these are the keys of the kingdom, to Peter, you remember that story? They were in Caesarea Philippi. And so Philip renamed Caesarea to Caesarea Philippi to honor himself in his. We're going to go way off corner here, but his interest in Caesarea was because they believed the gates of hell were there. And there was this cult to Pan. Remember the Pan, the god, plays the flute and has the bottom half of a goat? Well, there's some sort of R-rated reasons for that I'm not going to share online. But out of that cult of fertility, et cetera, and so forth, there was this, it was a real pagan center. And Philip wanted to associate with that city. He wanted his name on that city, so it became Caesarea Philippi. So when Jesus and his disciples up there, so there's a whole thing around that Jesus chose that particular spot at the gates of hell. So this is what they thought was gates of hell. And then where this terrible cult was at and all these things, at that place, he says, this is a rock I'm going to build my church on. He was not accepting paganism, he was standing against it. Okay? And so, but anyways, that's Philip. That's where that comes in. So Herod Antipas takes the wife of his brother Philip. Okay, and now it says he became a tetrarch of Galilee and Perea. So I had to look this up. Of course, I know tetra has to do with four, but why would it be called a tetrarch when the father was the governor? Why would he be a tetrarch? And what it really comes down to is, anybody want to guess? Want to guess on that one? So if you think of four, yeah. Yeah, okay, so the word tetra, if you think of tetra as being four, right?
Tetrahedron.
Yeah, tetrahedron, right. So a tetrarch was one who got 1/4 of something. So what the governor did was divide up the area basically in quarters. There's 4 descendants, and each had power over a quarter of it. Okay, so that's why he was called a tetrarch. Okay. Anyways, you see, evidently Herod Achilles got a governorship from Caesar. That happened, but these others had in a divided area. And you see it says he's of Galilee and Perea. So that relates back to our text. I just want to go back to that. And you can see here, we go back to the very beginning of this when this story is set up. And I'll take our folks at home back here. King Herod, blah, 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 became some, somewhere up here it says that they were, okay, where Herod's throwing the party, right? That's what I'm looking for. Do you see it, John? Maybe it's down here. Oh, it's in here. Oh, here it is, verse 21. Verse 21, okay? So let's go on the next page for folks. So verse 21, opportunity came when Herod on his birthday gave a banquet for his courtiers and officers, and look who else? For the leaders of Galilee. So Galilee was his area, okay? As a tetrarch, Galilee was his area, okay? And so we think of where Galilee is, of course, up near the Sea of Galilee, right? And but anyways, that's the connection. So that Herod is this particular guy here, Herod Antipas, from Galilee. And you know what? I think, just let me think for a second. I think we're going to go ahead and talk. We should probably talk about this guy too. Let's just go ahead and talk about this guy. We know about who Herod was and things that he was doing from a source other than from the Bible. And Josephus, I don't know if you ever heard of Josephus. He was later named Flavius Josephus, and he was a historian in the first century. He was born about, I think, around 36 AD, and he lived in maybe to the first few years or so of the second century. And his writings were like in the 90s, somewhere in there, 95, 94, whenever. When this piece you're looking at on the screen, when that was written around 94, 95 AD. And he is the earliest source for any mention of Christianity and of Jesus and what took place, okay? And so this is a really, really important and a piece of evidence that comes from very early on. And the earliest copies of his work, I think, go back to about the 4th century. So they are copies of his original, right? And while we're looking at this guy, I know you're all reading this, so I might as well just talk about this, and then we'll talk a little more about him. But here's what he had written. As far as what modern scholars can figure out, this is relatively close to what they think was originally written by Josephus, but there is a ton of controversy about this. But here's why this is written. At this time, there was a wise man who was called Jesus, and his conduct was good, and he was known to be virtuous. And many people from among the Jews and the other nations became disciples. Pilate condemned him to be crucified and to die. And those who became his disciples did not abandon his discipleship. That is probably kind of close to what the original was, because Josephus was not a believer in Jesus Christ as Messiah. He didn't believe he was the Son of God. He didn't believe in the resurrection of Jesus. The reason this is a little bit strange is because if you go back to that early copy, in that early copy, I'm going to use air quotes, Josephus, air quotes, says that Jesus is the Christ and that he rose on the 3rd day. Okay? The reason I have it in air quotes is because it's every scholar, anybody of any note that I could find, all agreed that the Christian church adapted the original writing in the context of the Christian faith, and they put words in this guy's mouth. Okay? That was what happened. And so the earliest copy of his work has these inclusions in it that, and all sorts of literary work or study it. Anyways, the way the wording was done and how it was handled and everything like that, they're able to pick it out and say, okay, this isn't from this guy, this is from somebody else. And then it got added to the text later on. But remarkably, if you remove those statements of faith, which I wish they were in there, but they're not, you still have somebody who recognizes that Jesus was a real individual, that this individual had a large following locally and abroad, and that Pilate condemned him to be crucified, and he died, and then his disciples continued to follow after him after his death. So it's a reference to Christianity that was in the world. So this is a really super important document from about as early as we can possibly get. And on this particular version, we hope is relatively close to what the guy actually said. Now, Josephus, he was a historian, which you'd think, well, that's kind of strange. In the first century, they had historians. Well, they did. This guy, he's Jewish, and he not only was he Jewish, he was actually, I think he was brilliant. So, and also a very powerful leader. So he was a leader of the Jewish insurrection. So we've mentioned briefly the Jewish wars that took place in the middle of the first century after Jesus and before the fall of Jerusalem, you know, from Rome. Hi, you probably want to go downstairs? Got it, okay. It's all right. Thanks for visiting. Yeah.
And that's when they thought Bar Kokhba was the Messiah, right? Bar Kokhba.
Oh, I don't know who
that was. Yeah, when right after Bar Kokhba, and they all said, well, he's the Messiah now. Well, then they went into battle with Rome and got killed.
I don't know who that is. You don't mean Barabbas?
No, Bar Kokhba.
Bar Kokhba. Well, I don't know that. All right, you got to bring us stuff next week to look at, Glenn. there's one. Do you know that name? I don't know that either. No.
Yeah, when Rome, you know, right around the time that they sacked Jerusalem.
Yep.
The insurrection was led by the same Bar Kokhba. Now, Bar means father, right?
Yeah, father of Kokhba, right? Yeah.
And so he was considered the Messiah at that time for a short period until he died.
For some particular group. Well, we got to look that one up. Anybody at home want to look that one up? You know, Glenn says the name is Bar Kokhba. You want to dig on your internet and do some searching while we're sitting here? You can go ahead and message Miss Kay. But anyways, this particular person, Josephus, he was like a general, and he was leading that insurrection, and he was a military officer, and this is what he was doing. He got captured by the Romans, and I don't know why they didn't kill him. And there's more to the story. But I'm certain that they recognized how intelligent and capable this individual was. And so they eventually put him in prison, but eventually he converted over to support Rome. He left his loyalty to his Jewish family and friends and army. He deserted them, and he became an important figure in Rome. Then they gave him Roman citizenship, and they became sort of the official historian for Rome. So the book that he wrote around 94, 95 is called, I'll get it in a second, Antiquities of the Jews. I think it's Antiquities of the Jews. And in that book is where this particular quote comes from, as he's writing about the Jewish experience as a Roman historian. I'm going to guess he didn't have a lot of friends left in Israel, okay, or Jerusalem or whatever. So, yeah, so there was that, right? So we're going to go back up here to the text where we must spend a little more time, but this gives us a little bit of context anyways as to what we're looking at here. And we're going to right back up in here again now, having talked about John a little bit. So the importance of John's role, I don't know if we can't exaggerate too much because it's incredibly important. And how much we know of John is factual history, and by the way, Josephus also talked about John the Baptist, as a matter of fact, how much of it is faith looking back on the story and connecting some dots, because if you look at the story here, it says an awful lot about Jesus and about his eventual death and about the issue of resurrection. Okay, some of these really big themes are in the story for John the Baptist. And one of the things we do know, according to the way the Gospels are written, is that when John the Baptist was killed, that's when Jesus' ministry started. Okay, so it was really a big inspiration for him to take the word on the road.
Well, John the Baptist had some doubts too, if you remember when Jesus.
Yeah, I know, exactly.
When Jesus sent his servant, somebody to visit John, and John asked the servant, "Is he the one, or is there going to be another?"
It's actually, you're pretty close on that, but actually it was John the Baptist sent some of his disciples to Jesus. That's what it was, and they asked.
I thought they sent him.
Yeah, they asked on his behalf. Yeah, and so it also, that story reveals that, like Jesus, John the Baptist had disciples. And it was not unusual in those days for various leading rabbis to have disciples who followed them. So different schools of thought, and John the Baptist was a priest. And we think of him, okay, he's this guy out in the wilderness, with camel robes and stuff, but the fact was he was a priest. So he was in some tradition of the Jewish faith. Maybe the Essenes, maybe?
Well, look at who his dad was. His dad was Zachariah.
Oh, that's a really good point.
Zechariah.
Because Zechariah was like the head priest in the temple.
Like we talked about last
Yeah.
week, he was a priest. He went into the temple for the incense.
Yep.
And he came up, well, Gabriel visited him there,
Mhm.
and said, and he doubted it, so David just said, "You're not going to talk." So
Yep.
the baby's born. So
Yep.
he went to Elizabeth. Can you imagine he's trying to tell her, "You're going to be pregnant, and you're going to have a, and you can't talk."
So that even though there's parallels, like the miraculous birth, right?
And
Yeah. Right.
the Lord did not. That was it was 400 years. Malachi was the last time the Lord spoke until Zechariah. 400 years later is when.
If you look at it as when Malachi was written compared to when the Gospels were written, there's a 400-year gap.
400 years.
Yeah.
They never heard a word.
At least in terms of
Zechariah. Heard from, and you wonder why would Gabriel go to Zechariah? Then the next time he goes directly to Mary. He's not going to go around.
Yeah, well, there's a fulfillment of Scripture thing that happens here. In fact, there's a mention of it in the text actually in that piece I read from Matthew. But if our folks at home want to look up in the Gospel of Luke, it's in Luke where you get the story of Zechariah and the angel talking to Zechariah about the birth of John, the preparation to go ahead of Jesus. So the birth of John precedes the birth of Jesus. When Mary goes to visit Elizabeth, her cousin Elizabeth is pregnant. Well, so is Mary, but Elizabeth is further along at the point that the baby's moving, right? And so she's several months into it. But there are these little parallels that run between these two individuals, both of them uniquely called for unique ministries. John the Baptist was baptizing people, in the River Jordan, you might remember, and Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist. And thanks, hon. Well, thank you very much, Karen, for looking that up. So she looked it up, Barracuda, and all she got was Barracuda. Thank you for that. We're going to look a little more deeply yet and see if we're going to get Glenn to do that. That's going to be his job to bring that in next week. She got Barracuda.
I didn't read that. I saw that in it.
That's a good, it's always interesting. So, okay, so I go back to the idea that John the Baptist, he foreshadows a lot of things about Jesus. It's interesting, right there in verse 14, some were saying John the Baptizer has been raised from the dead, and for this reason these powers are at work in him. They're talking about Jesus as being the resurrection of John the Baptist, which sounds ridiculous to us because they were only a couple months apart, right? So how could Jesus resurrect from John? It just
6 months.
Yeah, a couple months in there, right? Others said it's Elijah. Okay, Elijah makes more sense, because Elijah died centuries before, right? Why would they have named Elijah? Out of everybody in the Old Testament, why does Elijah get chosen as the possible one who resurrected and turned into Jesus? Any idea why that would be? Yay, okay, because that's swing low, sweet chariot.
He got risen up. He's one of the 8 that got risen.
That's the Elijah story. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. And the story is a flaming chariot. Chariots of Fire, the movie about the early Olympics, right? Well, Chariots of Fire, that's taken from that story. A chariot of fire that swept up Elijah and took him into the heavens. And so Elisha, his disciple, got to see that happen, but never really saw Elijah die. And so then around that story, we talk about the mythology around the Apostle Paul and around, Mary Magdalene in France and all kind of things like that aren't in the Bible. Well, a whole bunch of mythology then emerged around this figure of Elijah, kind of like a superhuman, kind of like, larger than life. He didn't really die. He rode a flaming chariot into the hereafter. And so then a tradition began, not biblical, but a tradition began that Elijah just might come back. kind of like Elvis, right? He just might come back. And so, believe it or not, faithful Jews, it's probably some folks are still doing this today, but believe it or not, faithful Jews back in the first century were leaving an empty chair at the Passover table just in case Elijah showed up. And they called it the Elijah chair. All right, save an empty chair for it. So there it is, right there across the table. In case Elijah comes, we're ready for him.
Where was Jezebel? Because she was after him.
She was. I guess she didn't chase him into the hereafter, Glenn.
No.
She did get in the chariot.
He was running from that Jezebel.
Yeah, he was.
He was all over the place.
That's a story for another day. Okay. So, anyways, there was this mythology that we're starting to as we're hearing this story, this mythology is impacting the story, right? They heard about that maybe Elijah would come. So when Jesus is hanging on the cross, he says something very Jewish from the cross. When we have the 7 last words of Christ in our sanctuary every year, somebody gets to stumble through those words. Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. Okay? Why, my God, why have you forsaken me? So when he said Eloi, Eloi, somebody on the ground said, listen, he's calling for Elijah. And that's something? There it is, right? So they thought, maybe he'll show up. Maybe he did come. Maybe he's in Jesus. Maybe that's who Jesus is, right? Okay, well, we're going to end up where we end up. So the Pentecost, not the Pentecost story, but the Transfiguration story, which is in several of the Gospels. The Transfiguration story, Jesus takes a couple disciples, they go up on a mountain to pray, and Jesus, he transfigures into glowing white. God speaks from a cloud, you know the story. And then 2 figures show up from the past, 2 people that nobody ever saw die. One is Elijah, and the other one's Moses. Okay, now in that story, it's important that Moses and Elijah appear because they're kind of metaphorical in a sense, because one of them represents the Hebrew law code, what they call the law of Moses, and the other one was the tradition of the prophets, which would be Elijah. And so, but those 2 characters from old, they were unusual because nobody really saw them die. Moses went around behind a hill and died, or they never saw him married or anything. So the mythology grew around the stories, and so this carried all the way into our New Testament. It gives it this colorful character that it is, and in their storytelling and how these images emerge and how they connect for people and how they're important for people. And they're thinking, well, resurrection is entirely possible because Elijah might come back, right? And he might rise from the dead. Maybe John the Baptist will rise from the dead. So the mythology around resurrection was found in various faiths around the globe. We now know through anthropological studies around the globe, literally, because in South America, in Peru, in Chile, also in Southeast Asia, also in Buddhist cultures, also in the Muslim faith. You can move up. There's from the Babylonian area, from Babylonian era, from Egypt, from Egyptian religion. So there was in all of those places resurrection stories that were intimately tied into, particularly more ancient stories, like you find in Mesopotamia, like you find in Egypt, that go back into the fertility cults and things. We talked about that just a little bit earlier, but go back into the changing of the seasons. And so as winter turned to spring, like for instance in Egypt, and I think, oh boy, somebody at home can help me with this one, like Osiris. I think maybe Osiris is the right, oh yeah, Osiris, oh, it's a crazy story. And I think that the god that was, Isis was the fertility god of spring. Anyway, that they would move from death into life, from winter into spring. And this was true of the legend from Mesopotamia as well. And the gods would go to the underworld for the winter down to the land of dead, and then they would come up where things were alive, and then things would start to bloom again. So this idea of resurrection was very much based on what people observed in nature as the planting season began, and they could profit from their agriculture. So it goes way, way back into prehistory. So the idea was not new when Jesus resurrected from the tomb. Okay? We kind of think of it as a very unique concept because we're Christian and we're looking at that particular event. but other people had legends and mythology around that possibility. Okay, so it wasn't foreign to them. So we see it show up here in Mark as Herod is talking about the anxiety he has over John. Okay, so yeah, politics and religion here in this guy blended together. So I think we're all on the same page here. Yeah, we are. So other said it's Elijah, it's a prophet. It's a prophet like one of the prophets of old. Again, think of the transfiguration. Then when Herod heard of it, he said, John, whom I beheaded, has been raised. So I guess Jesus didn't have a history before that. Just like, or I don't know how he figured that out, but that's what Herod is remembered as saying. So this comes from maybe some guilt, maybe. But now we're going to hear how that beheading took place, what was going on. So if Herod himself had sent men who arrested John, bound him, put him in prison on account of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, remember Caesarea Philippi, because Herod had married her. Okay? Now, and then John's telling Herod, hey, not legal, and John is referring to the Torah. So Herod had sold out to the pagan world of Rome. That's where he got his paycheck, right? And his power. And then along comes this thorn in the side, telling him, hey, you're Jewish, man. You're Jewish. You're breaking God's law. I'm sure it wasn't appreciated. Verse 19, and Herodias had a grudge against John and wanted to kill him, but she could not, and she probably didn't have the power or the ability and the access of it. For Herod, get this, Herod feared John, knowing that he was a righteous and holy man. Isn't that an interesting statement? He's afraid of him because he was righteous and holy. What does that tell you about Herod? It's just the opposite, right? And he knew it. He knew it, and he didn't like to be confronted by the truth, right? And he protected him. Don't get the impression he protected him because he cared about it, right? So look how he protects him. He puts him in prison, right? Okay, so he wants him where he can control him, and that's why he was protecting him. When he heard him, he was greatly perplexed. Yeah, he liked to listen to him. So we're getting a little insight here into the personality, maybe the mental state of a particular person. And through the gospel here of a very powerful political leader, and there's questions here, I think, in terms of just where does he stand? What's going on in his head?
He got exiled in France. Him and his wife and Salome. They have a burial place in some place.
Are you talking about Herod? Yeah, there are so many crazy stories about him. Yeah. And I think also, who was
Salome and his wife.
Joanne was telling us that, there's some story about Pilate being filled with remorse, and he went up on a high mountain, and there were dragons and stuff that guarded the mountain. It's some site that visitors go see.
Joanne.
Yeah, don't say her last name, but yeah, Joanne, yeah. And I'm trying not to use last names online, but Joanne, who'd been there and visited this site, and came back with it.
What
is this crazy thing?
He exiled him, and he wound up in it.
Yeah.
And that's where he died.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know that particular story. But it's interesting that you said Salome because, okay. Yeah, I'm glad you said something. I'm just going to jump down here just quick for our folks at home here a little bit. I'm going to put you guys back down here too. Because the reason the name Salome is attached to this young woman is because Josephus used that name. All right, that guy we had up on the screen a little bit ago, Josephus is the one who used the name Salome for her. It's not in the Bible. Okay? Yeah, it's and so in fact we're going to look. Tell you, why don't we just we're going to jump ahead a little bit because let's be mindful of time here a little bit too. Okay? And I think all right, let's go up into here. Okay, yeah, chapter 22. We'll go back to verse 22 rather. And so if you look at let me go back here. Come on, here we go. Verse 22. Opportunity came when Herod his birthday banquet and occurred years. Okay, we looked at that, and they're up in Galilee. when his daughter Herodias, now this is a translation that you're going to find in our church pews, and it comes from the New Revised Standard Version, which has outstandingly good scholarship, and yet it changed what was written in the Revised Standard Version, which was written back in the 1940s, which at the time had the best possible scholarship. And they have made a decision to change that. Now, what Kay got for me from the office was this version. This is the Revised Standard Version of this particular story. And I'm going to go down here. Okay, so as you're looking at the text the way it's written in verse 22, when his daughter Herodias came in and danced. Verse 22 in here, and when the daughter of Herodias herself came in and danced. Isn't that interesting? So this version says she's the daughter of Herodias, she has no name. The New Revised Standard Version says her name is Herodias. Josephus said her name was Salome. Okay. There you go, right? Again, it's fun to talk about some of these discrepancies and things, but it's not key to the truth of the text. But it is interesting how different understandings name somebody in different ways. It is exceedingly odd that her name would be Herodias because her mother's name is Herodias. Okay? And the person who is her stepfather was known as the Herod of that area. So it's, you think she would have been more closely named to her previous family, which would have been Philip. Anyway, who knows? One of the great challenges, and this sort of lays it open a little bit, is that because women were of such low status in the first century, we know they often go nameless. And so when we have a name like, as you mentioned, Mary Magdalene, right? That's really remarkable. Yeah, very remarkable. We know her name because so many of the women went nameless in the record because they just,
the only woman that's
just
not
a weight.
A wife,
Yep.
a sister.
Yep.
She's the only one that's in the Bible that's not a wife or a sister or something like that. Mary Magdalene.
Yeah, she comes out of the blue, so to speak, and we really don't know any context or history of her. And well, here's a good old Catholic tradition, which is also not biblical, and that is the belief that Mary Magdalene was a prostitute, because that's not biblical. Yeah, that's not biblical.
Not a prostitute,
but that's an old.
But she was a fornicator.
Yeah, but the Catholic tradition has been that she was a prostitute.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. That, yeah. Again, not biblical, but
she was a woman of means.
Well, Jesus had
financed the whole.
Yes, thank you. There was evidently there were several or many women of means in the followers of Jesus, because I can't put my finger on the chapter and verse, but there's a mention of the women that supported him, and evidently they were financial providers, maybe also with whatever resources and things, because they were traveling. So there was support in the crowd for what Jesus and the disciples were doing. Okay. But so often women don't get a mention by name, and that's just part of the sexism of. They didn't call it sexism back then, but they didn't treat everybody equally. That's for sure. And we're still struggling with that issue today, which we shouldn't be struggling with it anyway. So that's the name of Herodias and Salome, right? One of the women that came to the tomb had the same name.
Mary, we don't know.
Well, there's a Salome in one of those stories.
Was it her handmaiden or what?
Yeah.
If it was Mary's mother, they would have said it was Mary.
So I said there's going to be some corruption in here. So we're on the corruption page, and this is where the person in power is encouraging whatever behavior he's looking for. He's trying to reward her dancing. We'll talk about nepotism, right? So within the family of Herod now, she is going to determine an execution to happen, right? And so this is just a corruption that happens within the circles of nepotism, within the, what you can see, in fact, you can see it in American politics, by the way, and you can look at different families that have risen to political power. You can go all the way back, and certain families will be the succession of presidents, for instance, right? Or a president will make sure that family members get appointed to important positions. And in fact, when we were in Rhode Island, for our folks who are from Rhode Island, there was the great scandal around the building of the nice blue bridge that's up there because of the governor of the state at the time. Yeah, yes, Cianci. I'm going to use his last name because he was the governor at that time. Cianci. Yeah, so the big investigation around that was because there were family ties to contractors and things like that. So, and that's in the court record, so I can say that online, right? Okay.
That's how you get things done.
That's well, okay. It's just been mentioned that's how you get things done. And I think that, yes, I think corruption can sometimes be very close cousin to expediency.
Yeah, no, I think in that case it was. I'm just talking about Providence.
Yeah. Well, there's nothing new under the sun.
Yeah.
Nothing new under the sun. Because here you go. This is what's going on here. Somebody in the family, and she's getting what she wants. She did a nice dance. Okay, we're going to. I'll give you, half my kingdom and all this kind of nonsense. And so then we end up with John being beheaded. The great tragedy and sadness of the outcome here for a very, I don't know what's the right word to use for that, but for a gesture which certainly doesn't measure up to what the outcome was, right? So there's a whole dynamic at work here about power, and who gets to call the shots, who gets to determine life and death for others, right? And that's uniquely in the hands of somebody as powerful as the governor and in the hands of those whom he chooses.
What was the issue with Jane the Baptist?
Well, Herodias married him, yeah. She left Philip and went, this sounds like a TV show. She left Philip and went to Herod.
He was out there
and then John the Baptist is calling him out, see, for sins against God. So that's why she hated him.
But it sounds like Herod protected him, right? I mean, I know he put him in prison, but he said he liked to listen to him.
He did.
Well, yeah, it sounds like Herod.
It
sounds like Herod, I don't know if he had a little bipolar going on here or what he had going, but he was, he kind of liked him, but he had to keep him in prison. And he feared him, but he couldn't, it was just this sort of very strange relationship, at least the way it's described here.
It sounds like he wanted to keep him at his own distance.
Yeah.
He was sort of.
But he had him under control, see. Yeah.
Yeah, because John had power.
26, king was deeply grave.
Yeah, that's right.
Yet out of regard for the oaths of his guests, he did not want to refuse her. Bear in mind, he wasn't that deeply grieved, was he? Okay? Right, okay, so you look at the outcomes. So it's important whoever, the writer of the Gospel of Mark is, but the writer of the Gospel of Mark is doing an effective job of painting a picture of a tortured individual. Right, that's right. Okay? He's tortured. And is he perhaps then, because you got to think sometimes metaphorically, is this something being said about other leaders of the day, or is this being even said about really every individual, right? As we struggle with our own power and influence, right, and how many times we get off of the law of God, or however you want to look at it, there's a little bit of us maybe in the story, okay? And how we vacillate between being a good and compassionate and righteous person and maybe being somebody who's looking at others with prejudice or taking advantage of something when we get the opportunity. I mean, this is the mix of humanity here, maybe, right? Maybe he might be a good example of just
same thing happened with Cyrus and Daniel when they said he was praying, Daniel, and they said, well, you made the law for 30 days, no one could pray except for you, you're the king, you're God. You remember, Cyrus, he didn't want to put Daniel in the line. There's no way. And he had to talk, but he said, well, you made the law, it's your law, you got to abide by it, and that's what he did.
Yeah.
He didn't want to do that, though.
Yeah. Daniel's an interesting figure because Daniel is basically without sin. And as a character in the Bible, to be a person without sin is, I don't know of anybody else other than Jesus that actually is in that position. So someday we need to do a study of Daniel. It's very interesting.
Daniel's interesting.
Yeah.
You don't need Revelation. All the prophecies are right there.
Yeah, they're very similar. They're both apocalyptic, right? Yeah, they're apocalyptic writings. So let's go. Okay, we get John beheaded here. We're going to bring right down here to the last verse. We're getting down to the last few minutes. And his head came out in a platter and gave it to the girl. She gave it to her mom, which made mom happy. And then his disciples came, took his body, and laid it in a tomb. Okay? I guess they collected the whole body. I don't know. I would guess that maybe, I don't know, maybe they kept it as a trophy. I don't know. It was not uncommon in those days, to keep enemy's head on a pole. I don't know what they did, but anyways, they collected either most of it or some of it. They took care of it after that. All right. So we're gonna jump back up here.
So is the suggestion, she gave it to her mother, she suggested that she demanded this because that's what her mother wanted?
What about that picture again?
Okay.
All right, you can notice the hand signal that she's making.
Almost a sign of the benediction.
No, it's a sign of M. All the Renaissance artists did that. Particularly, that Michelangelo, Leonardo.
Yeah.
If you look at all his pictures, it's hard to make that symbol like that. We all know it's like this.
Okay, that's
Like
interesting.
that. That's the M signal. That isn't natural. You have to put your fingers like that.
So what's the thing with the M signal?
Magdalene. That's Mary Magdalene signal.
That's Salome.
You know that signal, if you look on the Statue of Liberty, the lady's holding the book, she's making that M sign.
Okay. Well, I'm okay. As an observer of this painting, I would say it almost looks like the sign of the benediction, which is a Christ symbol, pointing to Christ as a.
I kind of. But you look at a lot of the pictures, the hands with the signals. I mean, you're making that M sign.
Yeah. Well, there's something else to get looking into. One thing I love about Glenn, he gives us more stuff to think about.
You know that picture that he did.
Wow.
That he did of John the Baptist, who's pointing up, and also pointing up.
Well,
that's him. That's Leonardo. You know, that picture that he did. You know,
that's a self-portrait.
And also, you look on the.
Yeah, but you also have to realize that John the Baptist pointing to Jesus was an extremely common motif, and it's in paintings everywhere from that era. So he's not the only one that did that. So
all of it.
Yeah. Even infant pictures of John the Baptist and Jesus.
You walk the hand on some of those, and they're making that inside. Okay. It's on the Statue of Liberty.
There you go. There you go. So what are the other thing we need you to bring for next week, Glenn?
Why is she so revered?
Mary Magdalene?
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's entirely possible that she's in the painting of the Last Supper. That's entirely possible. And there's some that believe that on Jesus' immediate right is Mary Magdalene. And one of the things that if you look at, this is one of the fun things about looking at some of these great works of art, is there's always full of symbolism and stuff, and you always have an artist's influence over what it is. And so somebody like Michelangelo or Leonardo da Vinci, they have interesting pasts of their own. And Michelangelo painted the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, for instance. Okay, so he was a gay man. Well, in those days you didn't advertise that, right? But it had an impact on his perspective on art. And so take a look at the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel sometime and just think of it maybe perhaps as someone who's more interested in the male figure than the female figure, or something. Leonardo, oh my gosh, it's really obvious.
I mean, Leonardo, too, he was an alchemist.
Yeah.
He was. They're not just into lead into gold, they're into other things.
Yeah.
Like becoming one. Man and woman are one.
Yep.
And you look at his Mona Lisa, that's him. I thought that's
I've heard that theory. I'm going to say there are a lot of people who wouldn't agree with that one, but some think it might be somewhat of a self-portrait. Yeah, I've looked at lots of studies of Mona Lisa.
He does a lot with images,
Why
do you think it's a self-portrait?
It's.
He was an alchemist.
I'm going to put it this way. The thing is, when you have somebody like the crazy story about the Apostle Paul, but when you have somebody who's larger than life, then around that are going to come all kind of stories and myths and things, right? And so the Mona Lisa is the most famous painting in the world. So that brings out an entire galaxy of ideas and concepts and understandings and imagination, and everything becomes part of that story. And some of it might be historical, and probably a lot of it isn't. So one of the problems with Mona Lisa, by the way, and you guys can look this up at home, is that she, her face has changed so much because of the degradation of the paint that was used. Mm-hmm. So the Mona Lisa that we see is not exactly like the Mona Lisa that was painted. So we have the version that we know from Louvre that we know, but it's not the version that the creator of the painting knew, all right? So assumptions we make based on what we see can't be completely accurate because we're technically not looking at the same painting in the same way. So and this is something you guys can look at home, and you guys can look it up too. But if you take a look at what he did, he created tension within that painting intentionally. And so part of the tension in the painting is not her, it's the background. And if you look at the landscape in the background, you realize there's no way that one side would flow into the other side. He created like two different landscapes so the planes and everything are off. It's intentional because you're looking at her face, but there's something in there that's disturbing you subconsciously, and it actually has to do in part, at least, to the background. But a whole lot of other things, there's been a gazillion tests done and all sorts of computer models and all sorts of things. It's a fun subject to dig deep into and explore. And again, like so many things, there are no absolute answers. But for instance, she has no eyebrows, okay? In the original painting, she has eyebrows, okay? In the original painting, she has eyebrows. That completely changes her expression, by the way, right? Okay, we need to actually go into our prayer time together because we have folks at home that are running tight schedules, right? We try to keep on schedule a little bit. And that's one of the benefits. If you want to come and have a good time with us here, we do have a good time. And we welcome any input you've got. Sometimes we linger a little bit past the hour. So let's be in prayer together for the folks on our list. And I want to make sure I have your friend's name on here. Sophocles. Okay, very good. Let us be in prayer. Well, Lord, these times together are always so interesting and they're actually kind of fun. And we thank you that we can imagine and talk about things. We try to find our way into what is historically true and even look at the bigger picture of the stories that have emerged around it. But we thank you for this time together tonight. We ask for special blessing on those for whom we pray. So tonight we pray for Sophocles and Bruce and Roy, and Lee, and Brian, John, Dolores, Beverly, and George.
Helen, straight around.
Okay, thank you. And for Helen, thank you. No kid. Helen's like 90.
95.
95. Okay.
95.
Okay, let's stay in prayer here, guys, all right? And blessings upon Helen. And we ask that you would strengthen each of these people for whom we pray by your good presence and encourage them and whatever from their ankles to whatever else is going on. And lead us in your way as we seek to share your good news in the context in which we live. All this in Jesus' name. Amen. For our folks at home, I want to say good night. God bless you. And stay safe out there. Be good, okay? All right. And we'll catch you hopefully Sunday.
Know another thing about John. A lot of people celebrate John the Baptist, John the Baptist on June 26th. Okay? But his birthday somehow in between August 23rd. Okay? You know, God said 6 months.